Kerry Cassidy. Wow, this is such an honor. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. This is so fun for me, and I'll try not to ask too many questions that I've never been able to ask you before. But, first, before we dive into your life, because that's what this channel is about. You've been doing this for years. There've probably been many stages of your career here, and your investigative journey. Where are you right now with things in this journey right now? I know you've got a book that's out above top secret, I believe.
No, my book is actually right behind me. It's Rebel Gene. That was my first book, but
Oh,
I have two more books, which is the Captain
okay.
Mark Richards books, and
Right.
so I just released those. So
Yes.
yeah, so I have three books altogether. The two books about Mark Richards are his testimony in writing,
Yes.
so that I think they're great reference books for people that once they can get over the hump of realizing that we're not alone and that kind of thing, it's
Right.
really going down the rabbit hole with those two books. And then my
Yeah.
Rebel Gene is about me personally to some degree, but it's also about the overall big picture.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. That's all. And I thought that the two books that you had was called Above Top Secret. I thought that was the title of those, but I,
No,
that's
it's called Space War. The
okay.
Mark Richards is Space War.
Captain Mark Richards. Got it. Perfect. And because I saw those, and I actually think I have one on the way. But so this is just really fantastic. We're living in such incredible times. Way back years ago, before I go way back to your childhood, when you started this, and you are a pioneer as far as I'm concerned. You had to have felt kind of alone doing all this. Do you feel like it's like a crowded group now, as many more people have joined you here?
Yeah, it is really. But it's kind of fun this way because in the early days, it was much more difficult and
Mm.
trying to break through and break the ice. And I had a lot of criticism. People initially didn't like my style. They liked my first partner, Bill Ryan, but
Mhm.
then he and I parted ways, and it was very contentious. So that was a whole ordeal. But in the end, it was the best thing could ever happen to me because I was able to branch out and go the exact direction that I wanted to go without anybody, sort of saying, "Oh no, that's not a good idea" or anything like that. So I,
Yeah.
um, I, it changed my life. I don't know which this mission changed my
Mhm.
life because I was on the way to make sci-fi blockbuster movies. That's what I wanted. That was the path I had chosen. I worked for 20 years in the entertainment industry, as it's called, in movies and television. And I also, previous to that, I studied acting and directing. So I was really clearly on the Hollywood path to go
Right.
into that direction, but I reached a kind of a glass ceiling because I didn't fit in. I've always been a rebel my whole life. I've talked back to my teachers, my parents, you name it. So
Yeah.
that didn't go over too well in Hollywood.
Yeah.
They were used to people kissing their ass, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so I
Yes.
was a totally different, I was from Northern California. So I had the rebel in me. And that's what my first book is telling a bit about. Um, so yes, that's actually fueled my mission. It's kept me, I guess, feet on the ground because
Mhm.
I had like a real serious objective. I wanted to awaken people. I did get into Kundalini activation when I was in my 20s. I linked all my chakras and I had multiple samadhi experiences since then. And I was very into Eastern philosophy. I studied everything from Zen Buddhism to I Ching to Tarot. And then I got into the occult and all of that. And even studied Aleister Crowley. And I never wanted to be like a dark magician or any of that stuff, but I wanted to
Mhm.
understand our world because I
Mhm.
really felt something was very wrong. And so I was just I was an investigative journalist from quite a young age, and I did I did major in journalism in college. I was, I went to a very unusual radical school at the time. I don't know if it's radical anymore, but it was called Sonoma State University in Northern California. Um, and I was doing things like interviewing Angela Davis. I don't know if you know these names, but back in the day, and Maya Angelou,
Of
and
course.
I was a heavy duty, I guess you might say, radical feminist. I was all about being a strong woman, and I grew up with a very gutsy mother, and so that was an inspiration to me. She was initially what you call a prima ballerina. She quit being in ballet to raise a family.
Mhm.
And
That's
I
fascinating.
had 2 sisters, so there were 3 we were 3 girls, close in age, and, then we did have a brother, but he was kind of, like, in his own world. So, I just that's how I grew up backpacking in the Sierra Nevada and trying to be, a good athlete and all this kind of stuff. So,
That's fascinating. So
that was
so
my early
Carrie,
days.
I love that. So take me back even before that. So were you born in California? You from there? Is that where you've
Yes.
always been?
So, I'm, 3rd or 4th generation Californian. I think my great grandfather played cards in San Francisco Bay with Jack London, the famous author. And so I guess the family tree or part of it came from San Francisco Bay Area. And my mother was also born in California. She was from a kind of rather wealthy side of the family, and my father was not wealthy. I think they didn't ever say this, but I believe he was adopted. I realized this
Mhm.
only, just kind of like 20 years ago or so. I didn't really
Wow.
ever consider that he was adopted. He had very devoted parents, but they weren't able to have children after him. Supposedly he was their child, but I think that's very suspicious. Now, there might have been some whatever that was going on back then, but he had a very unusual personality and abilities and seemed to know more than he was supposed to know. As I realize now, of course, then I didn't know that. I just thought he was a little strange and knew stuff, but I didn't, whatever. And I was kind of like his right hand growing up. So,
Fascinating.
yeah.
So
So
growing
I'm
up,
not sure where you wanted the question to go, but
yeah, and so you said you gave us a hint that you were the person always kind of pushing the boundary, asking the questions in school, and so were you that way? Were you the only one doing that in your family as well, of the 3 girls and 1 boy?
Um, well, in a way, I like I said, I talked back to my parents. I became sort of the right hand of my father. My father and mother had a very contentious relationship. I didn't really get along with my mother in the early days, but eventually we became really good friends. My father died of a heart attack when I was 17, so I was kind of
Wow.
left out, stranded in a certain sense psychologically,
Yeah.
and had to make it on my own since then. So I developed a real sort of renegade style,
Mhm.
and like I said, I was. It's in my book, but I was the only kid in my family that was born in a military hospital, Moffett Field in California, in Northern California,
Wow.
and that is known. I found out later has an underground base, and I believe I was genetically engineered to some degree there. I have a very strange birthmark on my shoulder, and my brothers and sisters, even my parents, were also rebels. I mean, they were rebels at heart, but they were not conventional in any way. We didn't have a Bible in the house. They were loosely maybe considered Christians, except my father wouldn't set foot in a church.
Mm.
So he just knew stuff. And my mother, she went to Stanford University at a time when mothers didn't so much do that. When before I met her, obviously, she was a beauty queen, and they were both gorgeous. They looked like Hollywood stars, and so I mean, there was kind of a different kind of a family, I guess you might say.
Mhm.
And my
Yeah.
mother really loved Jackie Kennedy. She used to kind of wear her hair like that. She would wear her clothes like that. And my father was, he strangely looked like JFK Jr., believe it or not. But
Really?
yeah, but JFK Jr. wasn't, I don't know if he wasn't even born, until I grew to a certain age, whatever. And because I think we have, I don't know, whatever, like 7 years between us or something. But so he wasn't looking like JFK Jr. until much later. So back then we didn't see or know anything about that. It's just that there were weird parallels between that
Yeah.
and the Kennedys, and my mother was very focused on John Kennedy and the Kennedys and all that. And actually, my father was the opposite. He was a Republican back then. Even
Wow.
he was in the military. He built his own airplane. He was in the Navy. So yeah, just I don't know. I used to wear his flight jackets around the house, and I really love
Oh,
that kind of vibe. Um, yeah.
that's so
So
interesting that you were born in the military hospital and that there's such a history of that and you're the only one in the family, correct?
yeah, that was born there in that
Yeah,
hospital. Uh-huh.
that's so interesting, Carrie. And so your mom being a prima ballerina, that's a lifelong discipline. Did she try to
Right.
get you girls to take up that as well?
No, she really, I guess when she just made the decision she did, I don't know all the details, because I was too young to ask, right? But she just made this decision. She was very self-motivated. Both my parents were not followers. They didn't, like they weren't, like I said, they didn't follow religion. When I was 12, my mother decided our family needed to have some spiritual or religious background. So
Mm.
she took me, I was her eldest daughter. She took me all around to temples and churches of all different kinds, and asked me to help advise her on what she should teach her children. I mean, it was kind of a different kind of relationship she had with me.
Yeah.
And we ended up in the most furthest Christian thing called Unitarian. You might have heard of it. And
Hmm.
we only went to church or what was supposed to be church, for about a month or two, and we all rebelled and said we're not going. But before that happened, I learned in the first class I ever had in church, so-called church school or whatever you call it, was to learn about Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and that made a huge impression on me. I believe now that I have a past life in association, and I've had a very bizarre past life remembrance, whatever you want to call it, when
Hmm.
I was meditating in Egypt, because I lead tours of Egypt now and have for about the last 10 years. So, um, yeah, so that was my exposure. We were
Yeah.
not a kind of family. Now, I have since learned, now also being in MAGA, like I got kind of involved in MAGA over the years,
Hmm.
even though I lived and worked in Hollywood for, so that was, that's kind of more of a left life,
Right.
right? But
Yes.
I resonated with MAGA and the White Hats, and their mission to rescue our world and to rescue the children and all of that. So so I kind of got to know these right winger people. And
Yeah.
I actually, growing up in California, I never was exposed to that type of thought. We didn't have super religious right wing people around me at all. I grew up
Hmm.
in the Bay Area, like I said, born in Palo Alto, and grew up in Cupertino, the home of Apple
Okay.
Computer.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so I didn't, I was into high tech, I liked that. I had a natural proclivity. I taught myself everything. I taught myself the computer. I taught myself editing. So I decided to pick up a consumer grade camcorder at a certain point and make my own UFO documentary. I decided when I saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg, I was quite young, and I mean, for me, it was a revelation, because I didn't realize, I don't think quite at the time consciously, that I had been being abducted. So to me, that was like a major, major life-changing movie, because suddenly I saw on screen what I had been experiencing in my life. secretly. And I thought when I walked out of the theater that now everyone was going to know, it's going to be disclosure and people are going to be, just like me and know about all
Right.
of that. And, when I walked out of the theater, nothing had changed. And that
Yeah.
was, I was very young. I was like in my teens or something. And so, but I decided that then and there, I wanted to make blockbuster sci-fi movies to change the world, like Spielberg, which I thought at the time. Now I feel they're a little less radical than, I thought of at the time. But, when you're young, this is the first exposure you have. So,
Yeah.
subsequent to that, I went to Hollywood, but I also eventually went to New York City. I studied acting and directing.
Oh,
And
wow. Well, let me ask you a question
for four
before let me
years.
ask you a question. I wanna hear all of that, but let me ask you a question because you touched on something that had to have been incredibly pivotal for you. So at 17, your dad dies of a heart attack. That's a pretty significant age and a time of your life where you're just changing so much. How was that? And did that change your projection? And tell me about that.
Yes. Actually, what happened is I went to play. We on and off would play tennis together. So I went to play tennis with him, and partway through the game, he started to feel something in his chest wasn't right. So we stopped, and he drove home. But he was like really, I don't know, not good. And then he walked into the bedroom and in his bedroom and fell down on the floor and died. So it was super
Wow.
sudden, and our whole
Wow.
family was just totally shocked. Um,
Yeah.
and, I mean, we kind of bounced back, but for me, it was a super trauma. I guess you
Yeah.
might say that because I had been, like I say, kind of his right hand, and he was my,
Mhm.
sort of, I don't know, pillar of strength behind me.
Yeah.
And I would actually advise him and argue with him. And if he tried to argue with one of our kids or their kids and all that kind of thing, I would interfere. I mean, I didn't have a normal. I guess I wasn't a normal kid, but anyway. So when he was gone, it was like for a while my whole world fell apart. I was
Yeah, I
just
bet.
like completely in shock. But I guess I just realized I had to bounce back, and I did have a boyfriend at the time, so that was kind of a good thing,
Mhm.
that I wasn't completely alone in that sense.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I understood. I mean, he had emotional issues. He was a very strong individual. He had very clear ideas about what he wanted in the future and all that. But he was a really fun person as well, and very delightful person. So, what can I tell you? And so, yeah, since then I moved on, and one thing that happened was my mother. She had been, this was during a time when women were getting into their own right back in
Right.
feminism, all this kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so it kind of, I'm not saying it was a great thing, but it was a good thing for her because she had been arguing with him a ton and they had not been getting along. And so I think it freed her in a way, and she just really blossomed after that. So,
Mhm.
it was good for her in a way. And our family there, I had a brother and two sisters, so it wasn't that
Mhm.
small of a family, but
Mhm.
yeah, we survived. She got into real estate and she was very successful, and
And
so
you
on.
said that so you went to school, in a college in California, but then at some point you made your way to New York. When did that happen?
New York was, well, I had been, let's see, I went to college, I also went to graduate school, and I studied all the isms. So I was writing for this paper, and I was doing sort of radical politics, feminism, etc. And I was basically I was sort of, I guess, branching out, and I decided to go to film school, or study photography. First, I studied still photography, and I studied with the protege of Ansel Adams, this man who had followed in his footsteps and knew all his techniques and worked for him for years. And he was teaching at a junior college. So I took his class, and I was really obsessed with black and white still photography for a while. And then he brought me in his office and he said, this little speech that I guess a student always hopes to hear, but you never expect to hear. So he said, every career of a person, a teacher, they find one student that really is, got the promise that they are looking for, whatever. And he said that I was that student. And I turned to him and said, well, thank you. And I was very flattered, of course, but I said, but I want to make movies. and And that's when I made the turn to actually make it down to Hollywood. There was a producer that came to town that was part of a movie that was being made. It was a big Hollywood movie, and I got to be an extra in it. And he would come, and I was working as a, I don't know what you call them back in the day. It was like a coffee bar kind of thing. So I wasn't serving drinks there. I was serving coffees. But it was like a bar kind of place. It wasn't like, the way Starbucks wasn't like that. So anyway, and it was in a very nice restaurant, and I would meet all kinds of people. So I met this producer, got into being an extra in the movie, talked to him about it. And this is what he said to me, and this sort of changed my life as well, because he said, okay, I think that you are a nice, young woman or whatever. And I was quite young then. And he said, but I think you should just settle down, find a nice guy, get married and have kids, because that's all you're going to do if you stay in this town. And I was like, wow. It scared the shit out of me. And so I thought, okay, fuck that. So I went home. I had a boyfriend I was living with at the time. And I said, we're moving to Hollywood. You can stay or go, but I'm going. So 2 weeks later, I moved to Hollywood. I am not like a person who hesitates. Okay. I never was like that. Once I land on something that has an impact, I just go for it, obviously. Yeah. So that part of my personality has not changed. And so I did. I packed up. I went to Hollywood. He followed me eventually. We got a small house in the Valley, what's called the Valley. And I did something radical then as well, because I wanted to make movies. So I went around. I took my resume from college. So I was like, I don't know how old I was. I don't know, 22 or whatever that age was. And I went on, I did something you never do. Even now, you don't do it. I knocked on the door, literally, of production companies. And I walked into their offices and I said, hi, I just graduated out of college and I want to be a director. And I wonder if you have anyone around who might have time to give me some advice. And it was like just the right thing to do, as it happens, because Hollywood loves young, cute blondes that have, ambition. So I did get lots of good advice, but I also got offered jobs that I couldn't even handle, like amazing jobs, just because they liked me, Yeah. So eventually I did get a job making commercials and various things. So I worked my way up sort of this ladder. And I eventually got a job at HBO. I became an assistant to this storytelling division that was all about 2-hour movies for television. This is the early days of HBO. And so that was my big breakthrough job. And then eventually became a reader for various agencies. You read scripts and you recommend whether they get made into movies. So I worked for all the top agencies in that way. And, I sort of had a 19-year, literally, jobs in Hollywood. So, and then all of a sudden we had a writer's strike. It was hard to get a job in Hollywood at that point. And out of desperation, a girlfriend told me about working at Jet Propulsion Lab, which was in Pasadena, and that I could make a lot of money if I just was an executive assistant or something over there. So I went in and I actually became a contractor, advising in the media division because I had all this background in film and television. And
Mhm.
then eventually I went to UCLA feature film division, which I studied filmmaking, and I made like a short film eventually in that setting. But I didn't make it at the end until after the end of the, the the sort of curriculum. And then I went to the executive program there as well, executive MBA program, because I decided at that point that I had all this creative background. You know, I'd been
Mhm.
writing screenplays on my lunch hour at JPL and studying everything on the internet, anything and everything about ETs and you name it. And
Mhm.
writing screenplays was something I started doing, and I became a back pocket client for Steven Spielberg's agent at CAA. I know this sounds like I'm making it up, but it's true.
No.
And and so I, you know, I was really still on that path of wanting to be a producer and a director, but at
Yep.
a certain point I couldn't get past this glass ceiling. I would keep trying to push at it, but I did not get mentored by, usually young women like me got mentored by an older man usually.
Right.
But I
Mhm.
was too much of a rebel, I guess, and I didn't form those kind of relationships. You know, I did have a couple men help me, recommend me, like write a referral, you know, when you're trying to get a job, that kind of thing. But they never mentored me, like took me under their wing and made me move up through the business and so and so. So I never did that. And
Mhm.
so that's when I picked, my mother passed away, and she left me a small inheritance. And I decided I would make my own UFO documentary. I started going to UFO conferences, and I was interviewing people that were speaking on stage. So I got to know all the top speakers, and I would ask them if they had seen a UFO, because all the time they would pontificate for hours about the craft and how they moved and what they would do and all this thing. And back in the day, they didn't want to talk about ETs. Like, it was more or less forbidden to talk about abductions. So I had the abduction background, but I didn't talk about it. So I just went among them and I interviewed them. I was working on a short documentary, which I did eventually release, and it's on my website in case you ever want to see it. And during that time, you know, I basically realized that, you know, what they were talking about, they didn't really know personally. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
And so since I'd actually seen UFOs growing up, and you know, knew ETs were out there, and I had visitations and various things. So I was also very spiritual. Like I said, I was totally into, you know, Eastern philosophy and all of that. So
Mhm.
I studied, you know, all these Eastern books, including, like I said, the occult. So that was kind of my
Mhm.
side life, you know, that inspired me and kept me going. And then eventually I moved to New York City. I studied acting and directing. But when I was not doing that, I was actually meditating totally. I just got into this thing that I was going to reach enlightenment. And I didn't want to have a guru. I knew ahead, as a soul. I hadn't heard, I don't know how I knew all this, but I knew that yogis would, you know, sort of take advantage and control their they're called chelas, you know, the people that try to learn for them. And that, you know, I guess I sensed that there would be sexual controlling things going on, because that's a lot what goes on behind the scenes of so-called yogis in the East, but they don't talk about. But I really studied the occult deeply, and I understood what it was I was doing. And then I reached this incredible samadhi experience. All of a sudden, all my chakras linked up. You know, I basically, you know, it's like this a life changing thing. So my
Mhm.
entire body, you know, sort of changed, and I saw the matrix melt, and I just, you know, all this stuff went on. So that was going on while I was studying directing and acting.
In New York?
Yeah, in New
That
York
was in
City.
New York? Wow,
Yeah.
that is so wild. I have so many questions for you, Carrie. So, again, another pivotal thing before we with your mom, because that was one of the first things you said in this interview. Your mom was such a pivotal person in your life, obviously after your dad passed. And so those years you had with her, was that a a changing experience, being getting closer to her and her, I guess, motivating you
Yes.
and
Well, she was highly intelligent and very talented. She, like I said, she was a sort of an artist at heart. So she took up
mhm.
painting, and so she had her paintings hanging around the house. And she took us backpacking, like I'm saying. I mean, she was a real her own self, this sort of renegade. So when you take young kids backpacking, it's a huge ordeal. And we went into the Sierra Nevada, and at the time, that was when my father was still alive, and he wouldn't go with us. So she would do it on her own. And
Wow.
we just felt like we were conquering the world, that we were really amazing. And we'd go into the wilderness and stay overnight and be chased by bears and all kind of crazy shit. And, it's a very beautiful, California has so much to offer in that
Yeah.
way, in
Yeah.
wilderness,
Yeah.
Yosemite and all of that. So I grew up doing things like that. But my parents
Right.
were also explorers. Like, we did this very weird thing as a family when I was like 12 or something. They got this wild idea in their mind that they were going to drive the Alaskan Highway, which is a dirt road, to Alaska. This, I don't
Oh,
know, I think it was my dad's idea. And then we got all equipped, and we one summer, and we got all packed up and everything. And there were 4 kids, so 2 parents, and we went in this station wagon type thing, old fashioned kind of station wagon thing. And we slept on the road, in campgrounds, all that. I don't even know to this day why we went to Alaska. And I have since thought, maybe it was my father was like a secret agent or something. I have no idea what he was
yeah.
doing. Okay, because he did, they both did these things that were not, no other parents did these things ever. So we didn't even, like, they weren't really friendly with their neighbors. I mean, they were very, I can't explain it. They were not, like people that I see now.
Yeah.
Nothing like
Right.
that. My mother was never fat. My father was never fat. They were always slender and good looking. And, what can I tell you? That was
That's so
what I grew up with.
yeah. I mean, that's just so interesting. And so, did your mom, was she still alive when you started going off in the direction of the UFOs that you had such an interest
A
in? Did she
little, yeah,
understand
for
it?
some of that. I was writing screenplays, and she would read them. She would enjoy them and think I had talent and that sort of thing. So she was
Mhm.
sort of quietly supportive.
Mhm.
My dad was gone by then, of course.
Mhm. What about your
And
sisters?
they they were sort of living their own lives. I was more of an intellectual, I guess you might say, than they were.
Mhm.
Eventually, they did sort of blossom in their own ways. One of my sisters became a special education teacher, and that takes quite a bit of doing. There, that the curriculum for that is very dense. If you ever,
Mhm.
looked into that, and and she was successful at that. And then my other sister, she's very open and gregarious, and the two of us are very kind of like, we can get at loggerheads. If I want to do something, she wants to do something, like that. But we get along really well. I get along with both my sisters. And but she became she eventually followed my mother's footsteps and went into real estate, and she was very successful at that in Northern California. But
Mhm.
by then I had already moved to Hollywood and been doing all these stuff. So I kind of left the family, I guess you might say, in many
Mhm.
ways. In fact, the day my mother died, I was about to quit my job because she had gotten cancer, and I had a job as a journalist at this worldwide news thing, and I was writing an article about Schwarzenegger, believe it or not, and the people running the place didn't like it because they didn't want me to talk about certain things. And so I was going through that sort of drama in work. And then I got the call that she was dying. And so I packed up. I was walking out. I just quit my job. And then I got a phone call that she had passed. So I
Oh,
believe that she, passed on purpose, for
mhm.
whatever it's worth, so that she wouldn't have me leave my career and leave my, sort of path. I think she did that on purpose when she did,
Absolutely.
timing wise.
Yep, absolutely agree. As you're talking, I was thinking, gosh, there you were in New York, and that's where you had your Kundalini meditative experience, the craziest town in the, you
Yes.
know? How ironic is that?
Yeah, I mean, I had tough times in New York. I was studying acting and directing at night, and I was working during the day, and I was having psychic experiences. For a while, I went up and lived in Woodstock, and got involved with a bunch of music people and stuff like that. My psychic abilities were really opening up hugely when I was in New York, and the meditation just increased it, and so it was an exciting time.
Mhm.
I was completely on my own because my father had already passed, and my mother, she decided not to support us at a certain point. She had like 4 children, and she like drew the
Mhm.
line and just said, "You're on your own. I can't support you," kind of thing.
Mhm.
So there was one time when I had a girlfriend, I was down to like no money, and I had like $5, and she gave me $5 to buy a coffee, like, and I went without eating sometime in New York. I mean, I really lived the life. I don't know what you want to call that, of an artist and trying to make it and all of that. I mean, it's in some ways I probably had someone looking after me, someone up there somewhere, because I
Yes,
really was completely, I guess, on my own, you might say,
yes,
because I
you did
didn't
have some.
ever wanted to ask my mother for money because she
Yeah,
had 3 other kids and she had her own
right.
worries and she was a
Yeah,
single mother, and so I just was my pride. I didn't want to ask her for money ever. So
yeah,
I got to
yeah.
some sort of rough spots during that time.
I mean, it sounds like you had some major highs and lows in New York, which is just so wild. And so then what propelled you to go back to California?
Oh, well, that was very sort of almost mystical because I moved to New York on the date that I decided that I left. 4 years yet later. So I lived in
Oh,
New York for 4 years, studying acting and directing, and initially first got into NYU Graduate School of Film and Television and couldn't afford it. And then I decided to
wow.
study with a master teacher in Carnegie Hall called Robert X. Modica, who was very highly regarded, and he
Wow.
taught me the Sanford Meisner method of acting, and I would go from 6 o'clock at night until 12 midnight every night. I would walk all the way up to uptown New York from where I was down in the Gramercy Park area, and so I would just put my Walkman on at the time and do that every day, 5 nights a week, studying acting and directing. He was a
Wow.
great inspiration to me. He taught me a ton, and I really, I value everything that I learned from him during those years, which
Mhm.
was approximately on and off for 4 years.
Mhm. Wow, that's wild. And so, I mean, seriously, definitely had an angel on your shoulder taking that walk every night.
Yeah, but it was, I mean, early, and then in the late at night. I don't know. I'm not sure. I didn't take cabs, and I didn't take the subway. So I had gotten to a place where I didn't want to take the subway anymore. And I had some weird experiences with cab drivers, like trying to stalk me or something weird like that. And so I just decided, okay, fuck it. I'm just going to brave the streets. And I decided that if I had my Walkman, that would just keep me cool and I wouldn't be worried. And I only walked the very posh areas, right? To get back to like what's kind of like lower than Midtown, a little bit lower than Midtown at that point
Yeah.
where I was living. But I lived in Soho. I had producer friends that let me stay for free in their loft. That's actually where I connected all my chakras for a point. Maybe it was a month and maybe 2 months where I actually didn't go to work and I just meditated every day. I mean, I
Wow.
was really obsessed. I know I can, when I think of it now, I think, wow, that's like amazing. But I was determined like to do this thing. And I read
Yeah.
books about it and knew what I was doing. And yeah, so I,
That's so fascinating because I have a new series called The View of Truth, and it's the opposite of The View on ABC. But one of the stories that we highlighted was that more traditional churches now are incorporating meditation into, and so now it's becoming more mainstream. And you were meditating, doing it when nobody was doing it. You know what
right.
I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what makes it that much more unusual for sure in a fantastic way. So when you headed back to California, what was your goal? What were you headed to do, and what was your next path?
So it hit me. I'd been there 4 years and I kind of accomplished what I want to accomplish, right? I learned a great deal about acting and directing. And
Mhm.
I was getting, as I say, more and more psychic. So having a lot of psychic, I don't know, stuff going on. I was being visited by ETs and all kinds of stuff. And so I just woke up one day and said, okay, it's time to go back. And so I had very few belongings at that time. And I literally got on a bus, which I didn't realize I was doing, which was 4 years to the day that I'd arrived. So there was some kind of orchestration. And by the way, I was also, when I, at night, I was going underground to school in New York. Okay, so I would go to sleep and I was going down into some kind of underground place, and there were other students there as well, and we were all being taught certain things. So that was also part of my
What
experience,
the?
and I was also, I studied everything. I was a voracious reader my whole life, and so I just knew it was time to go back. So I had no money. I had like $200 to my name or something crazy. And I decided that I would take a bus because I didn't have a car. I couldn't afford a plane and so on. And so I did. I took a cross country, one of those buses that stay on the road the whole time. They drive all night, it's kind of a horrible thing to really do if you think about it. But I
Yeah.
survived and arrived back in San Francisco. Then I had to get home to where my mother was. But, I showed up and she just said, "Oh, you're way too skinny," and all this stuff. And yeah, so then I decided that I was going on my way to Hollywood. I was going to go in Hollywood and, take all the studying I'd done and actually put
Right.
it into getting
Yes.
the job and all of that.
Yeah. And so what happened on that path? I mean, because your life turned, obviously you took a different path. What happened there?
Well, I mean, that's when I went to work. I got a job at HBO. I had to take
Okay.
the bus to work every day, and in LA, that is not cool at all. But I mean, it was just horrendous. But eventually, I bought this junky old car and survived. But it took me about a year to do that. And when I moved into an apartment, I didn't have any furniture, like none. I
Wow.
just I didn't even have a futon to sleep on. I just went, piece by piece. I got myself together, but it wasn't like overnight. And I was meditating. I was sort of I don't know what you would call it. I guess a spiritual seeker, and I identified. By the way, I guess I had forgotten to tell you that I also went to Egypt with my mother when I was quite young during this time, and went hiking to Annapurna South. That's a trek up in the Himalaya. And I completely identified with Eastern, like Nepal and India. We went to India. I saw the Taj Mahal. And because my mother had money, so she wanted to travel. So then she would take me with her,
Mhm.
right? So then I also went to there was somewhere else I went that. Oh, well, Nepal and India and also Egypt. So
Mhm.
we did these like amazing trips that were right in keeping with what I had been studying on my own, right? So by the time I got to this stage in Hollywood, I knew, I took pride in the fact that I could handle stuff on my own, that I could live without furniture type, for
Yeah.
a while.
Yes.
Um, it's amazing to me when I look back, but I was when you're young, you have this sort of this idea that you're just going to live forever and
Yep.
nothing's going to stop you and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
because I'd had so much, my father believed in me, my mother believed in
Mhm.
me. I never had,
Mhm.
I've heard stories, horror stories about women that their fathers put them down all the time. And I never had that. Okay. So
Right. Yeah.
I was blessed by
Yeah.
not having a bad, impression of myself. I've
Yes.
always had sort of a positive expression of myself. And that I think really helped me in these hard times when I had
Mhm.
no one around,
Yeah. I mean,
so,
you
um,
you had the self-confidence to believe that you could do whatever you needed to do to survive. And
right.
so after the jet propulsion, um, that where you were involved, what what led you to your first interviews of that led you on this whole other path of journey?
Okay, so remember I went to film school and I worked my way up the ladder, and eventually,
Yeah.
I worked, in Hollywood for 19 years. So
Right.
that was my home, literally. I
Yep.
mean, and I hung out. I was very comfortable in sort of the halls of the companies in Hollywood, where I was around a lot of outspoken New York Jews. Okay, and I loved that. I love because I grew up in a family that was quite outspoken anyway. Okay, we were just we wouldn't hold back or whatever. But of course, I was like that mostly, and one sister was, and the other one was a little more emotionally traumatized, I guess you might say. But she was still vocal. um, but so I had all that in my background, and I had success in Hollywood. I was able to get good jobs, and I was able to move up the ranks and learn what I needed to do and write screenplays that I got good reviews on and things like that. So I was on the track, right? And I'd already studied all of the acting and directing in New York. So I had that behind me. But it was what happened was, of course, then that there was a writer's strike and you couldn't get jobs in Hollywood. They just sort of dried up overnight. And I went to JPL. Now, I had dreams ahead of time about Jet Propulsion Lab that I was afraid to work there because, and I think this comes from my abduction history. I'm not sure exactly where, but I do think I was also military abducted when I was born in Moffett Field Hospital. And I learned that from Norm Bergram, who was one of my interviewees. Anyway, he worked for 30 years underground in Hollywood. I'm not Hollywood, in Moffett Field for the secret space program. And I told him about, because there was a time when I was quite young, I mean, really young, like went on a field trip for school and was in the Bay Area. So we went on a field trip to what's called Ames Research Lab. That was part at the time of Moffett Field. It was right near there. And I remember getting off the bus and going up to the building and saying, "Oh, I know this place," but I'd never been there in my life.
Oh, wow.
So I know that I had some kind of something going on with me
Yeah.
during all of this
Yeah.
stuff. And anyway, so I think I've forgotten where I was
So
when I
all
was
your so
explaining.
when did your interviews, all your interviews and your whistleblowing start to
Oh,
happen?
so okay, so as I say, my mother passed on, and I was
Mhm.
trying to decide at that point because it was kind of like a juncture with between Hollywood and sort of this space program, and I was writing these screenplays that I wanted to make into movies, and not quite getting anywhere. I was kind of trying to do package independent film projects. And I actually had quite a few, and I brought them to Spielberg's company, Kathleen Kennedy, and basically got involved with what's called the wingmakers.com at the time. So I was really digging into becoming a producer. And that's when I just I guess reached that glass ceiling and couldn't get anywhere. And so then I decided that I was going to well, I guess my mother passed away, and so then I decided one day I decided that, okay, what am I going to do? So I wanted to make a UFO documentary because I wanted to bring, I knew that Spielberg was an inspiration to me, and I wanted to bring my, abduction past into my present, so to speak, into that world,
Mhm,
knowing that I had
mhm.
something to give and gain from understanding it better. And so that's what I did. I actually picked up a consumer grade camcorder one day at this Best Buy thing. And it was not at all a professional camera, okay? But I've always loved photography and I was very good at it, as you
Mhm.
remember my Ansel Adams experience and all that.
Yeah.
So so I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go to these. There was a Hollywood UFO conference, and I just went there, and I just, was in the audience, and I had my camcorder. And actually, during the breaks, I started going around to all the different, what they would do back in those days, and they still do it, is speakers would go sit at a table when they weren't speaking and sell their books. So I just took my camcorder and I started going around all the different speakers and all the tables. I interviewed, believe it or not, Jim Mars, Rich Dolan, all these top speakers on the circuit at that time
Mhm.
were all at that conference. And I
Wow.
spent, like, I went up to them and I had decided I was going to call my UFO documentary, Have You Seen a UFO? And so I was a complete anomaly in that setting, I have to say. There was no one like me doing anything like that. So when I went up to these guys and they're sitting with their books and asked them for an interview, I just on the spot would put the camera in front of their face and start asking them questions. And that's my UFO documentary. And it worked out very well. And it's doing that connect me with my first partner, which is Bill Ryan, who was English, who was representing what's called the Serpo.org project. And I contacted him. Somehow I got on this news group, Victor's news group, which had tons of journalists and tons of agents and other ex-military and military. And so it was like this news group, and you would get news every day. And they were all into the Serpo.org project because that was an exchange program that took place at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which Richard Dreyfuss suited up. He was supposed to go, and there were really programs like that, apparently, and this one in particular. And I know this because we got tracked and basically met this guy who was I don't know, it was a captain or an admiral or whatever the hell he was. We actually went to his house in Phoenix, Arizona, and knocked on the door and asked him for an interview. And they didn't know how we found him. And anyway, so the point being is that I started on that road by interviewing
Yeah.
my first partner, Bill Ryan, the same way I did Rich Dolan and all these other people at the conference. But I signed up on the news group. He said he was speaking in February in this conference in Laughlin. So I decided I'd go, and I wrote to him and I just said, "Hey, I'd love to interview you when you're speaking." And he said, "Okay, fine," something. And so on the day when I was supposed to interview him, I showed up. He'd just been interviewed by a crew with lights and camera and all this stuff. And I just walked up with my little consumer grade camcorder and I just said, "Okay, are you ready for the interview?" He looked at me like I was crazy. But we hit it off and became friends. And the winter interview went really well. And I'd already started my own channel online. And I was posting, information and videos about various things. And I interviewed a guy, which is now a famous person, called Robert Sala, who happened to live in my area in Southern California, in the general area. And he was a military whistleblower. So I was kind of going gradually. There was Bill, what was it? Hamilton, I think his name was. I interviewed him, and he'd written a book called The Aquarius Project, or Project Aquarius. So I was getting Camelot together. We didn't call it until I met Bill Ryan. We didn't call it because we realized that we both had the same drive to want to get the truth out. And so that's how we started. And then we started traveling the world. At first, we had my mother's inheritance, and we traveled in this funky old car that he had in Europe because he was European, he was English. And I don't know, things just one interview after the other. And pretty soon we had a huge following. And this is way in the beginning. Nobody was doing this. They
Yeah.
weren't traveling around, okay, with a camera. And
Right.
so we became like famous overnight. And every interview that we were doing, people were like on the edge of their seats to get the next interview because somehow we kept meeting and people came to us and interviewing. It was like, I don't know, the whole thing was, we always called it magic. We figured we were
Mhm.
just, everything was magical because we just got one great interviewee. I mean, I look at it now, in fact, I'm blocked from interviewing anybody out there. Any of the new whistleblowers won't speak to me. Even when I get them to agree to an interview, they back out like a day later because the military has gotten to them. So they're all afraid of me. I have some special power where I can influence the person to speak the truth. And it's
Yeah.
true. I mean, 107's the famous one who said, I'll never do another interview with you again because you're going to make me break my security oath. But I don't try to do that. Okay. So it's not intentional. All I do
Right.
is just ask good questions. I had the
Yes.
journalist I've been trained as a journalist.
Right.
I write articles. So it's really gone on from there. I, you
Yeah.
know, and I didn't know, I thought, eventually that it would, I don't know, burn out or I would burn out or something, but I'm still on this mission and it's gotten,
Mhm.
it's fascinating. I mean, because I've learned so much and I've learned
Yeah.
at the feet of the best whistleblowers you can possibly imagine. And that went
Yes.
on for like 20 years. So it's 20 years ago that I started Camelot.
Yeah.
And
Oh my gosh. Carrie, that's amazing, and so I think back, so your life, you had the confidence, you went out, you did what you had to do to feed yourself, clothe yourself, whether you were in New York, wherever, whatever you were doing. And so you had that chutzpah, you want to say,
yeah,
to be able to deal with what you went up against through the years as you got older, with whistleblowers, with people telling you not to, with people, lying. And so that's the other thing. Back then, as now, but you were doing this as a pioneer here. When you were interviewing people, whistleblowers, right? Wouldn't you have to look at it all with such a grain of salt? Because even whistleblowers, you might not be getting the whole truth. Wasn't it always something in the back of your mind?
well, let me say this. Do you know that even Julian Assange back in the day apparently came to our website and tried to communicate with us? We didn't
Wow.
realize who he was at the time, and we didn't even, reply, I don't think. But we found out later that, he had become a fan. So we were out there doing this before he came forward, right? But he was part of, Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. They were the two major whistleblowers, worldwide
Mm.
whistleblowers that were made an example of, and that the powers that be cracked down on, okay, and
Right.
tried to put them behind bars and various things. So we had done our whole, a huge amount of interviews, and we're already, like, I had a YouTube channel when they deleted me overnight in during the COVID days for interviewing doctors. Uh, I had, I guess it had 70 million viewers worldwide. So it's practically a
Yeah.
television channel or something crazy.
Jeez.
Um, but so I just, I was really driven, because I wanted to make movies initially. So this was
Right.
actually, to me, um, going and making documentaries like, oh God, I have to do this, but it's not really what I wanted. But in spite of that, the people that we met were so amazing and the stories were so amazing. And I have always had, I'm very, you can kind of tell, I'm a very straight shooter. So
Yeah.
I kind of assume the other person is going to also be,
Right.
I because I studied acting and directing, I always wanted my witnesses to be seen in the best light. So
Mhm.
in the early days of Camelot, you'll see that I was not on camera. I was behind the
Right.
camera. And
Yep.
I knew exactly how I wanted to shoot them. I knew what I wanted to treat them like. And I became
Mhm.
friends with people, even on camera. Bob Dean loved me. He was a sergeant, sergeant major, I think. He basically, people would write to me, "We're going to kill you for talking to him like that." And he adored it. He adored that I just gave him shit. And I don't know, these guys, Gordon Neville, loved me. I mean, they liked me because I was such a rebel. And they were rebels because they were speaking
Right.
out. You have to understand. So I guess we had a meeting of the minds in that sense. And it was like
Yeah.
this huge mission that I felt every time I did an interview in the early days. It was like between life and death. I thought, if I don't edit this and get it out right away, they're going to stop me. And I just couldn't bear that thought. So I just
Yeah.
would edit, till beyond midnight. I got so exhausted because in the early days, Bill Ryan didn't really know what he was doing. And I taught him eventually to use the camera to help me with editing and so and so. But in the very beginning, I just remember being so exhausted all the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
because I was like the world was on my shoulders.
Yeah.
So eventually, that changed, and we were much more balanced and all of that. And he brought a lot to Camelot in the early days before his girlfriend got jealous and tried to split us up, and then another whistleblower tried to split us up, and all these crazy things went on. But I don't know. And I've been very blessed. I've been very protected.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
intuition during interviews has also always protected me.
It would
Um,
have to.
and there has been this some kind of a Camelot magic. What would happen was, this is the best explanation of the magic. When I went to meet, I guess I won't say the place, but it was in Southern California, a whistleblower, and that I had found out about, or he approached us, or whatever it was. But I went by myself, and I met with him, and he had tattoos up and down both arms, and he was an ex-military guy, and he was super skinny, and he was super paranoid, like looking all around, and I don't know if he was on drugs or what, and he was like super nervous. And so I just sat down with him and started listening to his story, and he was telling me how he was made into a dolphin human hybrid, and the military was using him, and then all of a sudden he was kicked out of the military. I can't remember why. And this is documented. We have the interviews with Aaron McCullum. So anyway, so what happened was, then we released the interview, and it was huge success. His whole self-image changed. Suddenly he was accepted by the world. He became a star. I mean, this is what went on with one interview after the other. I would make stars of the people. Bob Dean said I made him a rock star. Even though he was already famous for, being on the circuit and breaking his security oath to do so, but he was an old boy, so they did punish these people. They killed their children, actually. Supposedly they died, and one got killed in a Clifford Stone, I think was his son, in a motorcycle accident. And Bob Dean, his daughter, supposedly committed suicide. I mean, so they suffered for the truth they
Mhm.
told. But
Right.
I don't know, there is something, we didn't have fakers. I mean, I don't know if we just spotted them ahead of time or what, but almost, I'd say 95 to 97% of all of our witnesses were dead on, telling the real truth, because we were so radical and so unusual that it wasn't it's later when all the fakers came along. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
wasn't like that in the early days.
Right.
And somehow we also had a really good sense of when someone was fucking us around or didn't really know
Right.
what they were talking about. I mean, I can't explain it, but it's always served me well, my intuition and my psychic ability. And I mean, we
Were
went
you
to Russia. We interviewed Boriska, this child. this boy from Mars. I mean, we went to, St. Petersburg, and we went to Moscow. And I mean, we were just, nobody did that. Nobody did that. I mean, even to this day, when the BBC or one of those newspapers in Britain wants to talk about this boy from Mars, they use my footage. They steal it from me, even to this day, you know.
Hmm.
And at the time, he was like 12 years old. Now he's in his 20s or whatever it is.
Do you think, Carrie, that because at that time very few compared to now are talking about the things with which you were talking about at the time, you think that's why also that maybe the powers that were or left you kind of alone because they figured it wasn't going to be something that most people could resonate with anyway at the time?
Yeah, I mean, we did get attacked. We got almost killed several
Oh,
times. We
wow.
had tons of flat tires. When you're speeding on the freeway, having a flat tire, you could easily get in a bad accident.
Yeah.
We one especially famous story that I've told before, which is, Bill Ryan had like, I guess, a love for Switzerland. So we would go there, and he would study. God, what's it called? Ron's org. It's part of the reason we split up, because I don't like whatever that's called. I forget it. The word's escaping me. But anyway, it's this certain kind. It's not religion, but it's you know exactly what I mean. If I can't remember
Okay.
the terminology. Anyway, so I didn't like the fact that he had to go and be audited by his auditor, whatever that type thing. And he was talking about UFOs and UFO experiences that he had and stuff like that. But I was not allowed to go. So we would go to Switzerland. I spent months in Switzerland, and basically Switzerland was this really amazing place, right? So these were the kinds of things we were doing. We were on a dime, staying in little places that we could afford and all of that. Um, I think I'm losing the trail here because I forget the question.
Because yeah, no problem. A place where you were someone tried to hurt you or in your situation.
Okay, so we went in this station wagon that he had. That's an Audi, but it was super old, and he had it worked on before we drove from across the channel. You come on the channel with the boat,
Hmm.
with your car, and then you drive. So then we drove to Switzerland, and we drove up this thing called where the Alps are, and you go. It's called Grindelwald, and so we went up this treacherous, windy road that goes all the way up these huge Alps. And we got to the very top and pulled into a parking lot, and the entire wheel fell off the car.
Oh my
If it had
gosh.
fallen off while we were coming on the way up, we would have fallen over the cliff and might
Oh
have been dead.
God.
So that was just one incident. And the guy said it was a clean cut, that they cut right through so that was supposed to kill us.
Wow. So, I mean, I mean, as nerves of steel as you might have had of your experiences in life, that had to have been unnerving, especially moving forward here and there.
Yeah, but we both agreed in the early days that we both, if they killed us, we would come back and do it again. So we had this sort of tempting fate attitude. To his credit, he had that too. Since then, I've
Hmm.
known people that, I mean, we had webmasters. The first webmaster we ever had, he signed up to work for us. He went home and his entire apartment was trashed. He called us up and said, "Never speak to me again. I don't want you to call me. You've ruined my life." And that was the end of it. So I've had people that were so afraid of what
I
we
bet.
do that couldn't handle us or any of it. But for some reason, at least we got along on that one thing. We were always willing to tempt fate to get the truth out.
Yeah,
So, you know, there were other things that
absolutely.
interfered. We had different interests and so forth. I mean, right now
Right.
he's like in Ecuador living in the mountains like a recluse or something. I have no idea. But I am just not a recluse. Okay. That's not
Yeah,
my life. So
yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, but you're supposed to be here, Carrie. I mean, you were supposed to do this heavy lifting years ago and do serious heavy lifting so that that way they say you got to go back to know the future. And part of that, I think, is going over all the things and all the people you talk to and all the documentation. I think it's part of our astounding period with which we're living, for sure.
it
And
seems
just
now that it was meant to be, and that I
yes,
learned all the things I needed to learn to be able to help other
yes.
people get up to speed, because it's very unique, the whistleblowers that were actually alive at that time. Now, several have passed on, several have been killed, literally, early deaths, but they were already older because we hit the scene at a time when the secret space program had been in operation for many years. And these men were all getting, and most of them were men, and they were all getting older. They were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So they were at a time when their consciences, and they knew that, their passing was coming. And so they wanted to give something back to humanity. So they were driven in their own way, and they had been put out to, I call it put out to pasture by the, I mean, for people who know, Richard Allen Miller is just such a person. Okay. So he
Mhm.
worked for them his whole life, brilliant man, physicist, etc. Now I have been interviewing him and bringing him back into the public eye for, many years now, but he's just such a person where he can barely stay alive. They keep messing with him. He's written, I don't know, 20 something books, but they steal the money. He's practically penniless. They do screw with these guys now, especially when they try to blow the whistle. He still works for Navy intelligence. He even admits it openly. But
Wow.
they've got him on a short leash and they mess with him. This is what goes on. People, one thing is that people don't realize it. They talk about disclosure and the UAP hearings, and all of that to me is a blessing. But the reality is they're still prosecuting whistleblowers behind the scenes. They're still
Mhm.
messing with us, and they're still threatening us. And, even me, I have to be very careful,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah.
And Captain Mark Richards, he's just disappeared. I mean, because I published one paragraph that he sent me about Three Eye Atlas, and suddenly he's just gone. I
Wow.
assume he's still in prison. He's been in prison for 38 years, but I can't hear from him. And then I put this out on the internet like a week ago, and then less than a few hours later, I hadn't heard from him for 2 months. And I was saying, I don't know. He must have been, blowing the whistle on Three Eye Atlas. What it is, he said, we're going to use all possible force. That's what he said. He said, covered himself. He said, it's not a threat, but we're going to use all possible force. And to me, coming from a captain of the military, he was actually a captain of a Starship Enterprise, for him to say that, these guys don't talk, lightly. Okay. So that
Yeah.
is definitely a warning. Okay. He's basically knows something. No, because there's all these whistleblowers are starting to disappear from my life right now. During the last 6 months, ever since Three Eye Atlas hit the scene, the people that I have been depending on to be my contacts have disappeared. And a lot of them are secret
Wow.
people. And Mark Richard,
Wow.
so he said that. I published it, and he disappeared for 2 months. I finally went out like a week ago and said, oh my God, he's just gone. I don't know what's going on. And I got a fake person on his prison email thing. It's not it's a texting thing that you can pay for in a prison. It's like an intranet kind of online that they monitor the hell out of course. And some guy came on and said, oh, you've seen all the UFOs over the United States. I'm so overwhelmed, gotta go. And that is like so opposite from Mark Richards' personality. He would never ever in 1,000 years talk like that. It's just not him.
Wow.
And so
Right,
they had
right.
somebody faking him. So I don't, so that's what's up. Okay. So
That's wild.
this job that I do has all, I mean, strangely enough, it has great stuff that have happened, wonderful, earth changing, fabulous stuff. And it's also got its dangers and bullshit that goes on, so what
I
can
can't
I say?
even imagine. So I want to ask you a couple last questions. So a couple weeks ago, there I am watching TV, and uh, Candace Owens is on, and all of a sudden, they show your interview with Bill Wood on Project Looking Glass. And I'm like, I couldn't believe that they were showing that. Did you know right away? But because as you said in those interviews back then, it was focused on the person you were interviewing. Um, and so, but it was a blip of that, and she talked about Project Looking Glass, and I was like, "There's Carrie's interview. OMG!" What did you think about that?
Well, first of all, I don't know if they gave us proper credit. I hope they
Yeah,
did.
I
A lot of people liked that interview because he was so upbeat about the future. He is a techie. He actually turned against me. Some of the whistleblowers turn against me. I don't do anything, nothing. We have our interview and that's the end of it. But they turn against me because they realize they have told more truth than they wanted to. Usually it's that.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
he's one of those guys. He was picked up, he was put into prison in Idaho underground for years after he eventually, he came out to me. And I was in touch on and off with his, I don't know if she's his wife or his girlfriend. And he disappeared from the scene for years, and then he showed up back up, and then he disappeared again. So I don't know where he is or what he's doing. But yeah, he was problematic as a whistleblower, but he did say some great things.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's fascinating that it's basically becoming mainstream, that whole Project Looking Glass. I mean, she has obviously millions
but
of
he
people
was not the
watching. It's
first person to talk about it. So it was Dan Burish and his partner Marcia McDowell that got involved with MJ12 and a bunch of stuff. So very early on, I mean, they were very early on my list of interviews. Bill Wood
yeah,
came along, and his real last name is not Wood, but whatever.
very so interesting. So I watched you too years and years ago, and I was fascinated by uh, Ashiana Dean that you interviewed. Because this is this woman that just talked a mile a minute about things that just I'd never heard of before, and you just would interview her just so matter of fact, and I mean, you were just so good. W what were your thoughts about her? Because I was just fascinated with that.
Well, it was a very psychic connection because back in the day when I was working at JPL, I was surfing. I was given a job. Okay, so first I was a contractor and I worked with scientists and I helped them design what was called this little badge for the lab, as they call it, called the rover. And I told them to put the rover and to make that their emblem and so and so. So I used my Hollywood smarts and the things I learned to help them kind of move their projects along. And I got to know these famous scientists there and engineers and everything. And I learned a hell of a lot there. But
Mhm.
anyway, so I was writing screenplays on my lunch hour, but eventually the job that I was doing to be a contractor dried up. So I was forced to go, a step down or two because as a contractor, I was a manager. So then I had to
Mhm.
go be an executive assistant because that's the only kind of job I could get. And then um, I had nothing to do all day. So I would
Mhm.
go to work. And I know that it was engineered this way, okay? Because I would go to work every day and I would sit at a desk and look nice. And if they ever asked me to copy a page or they asked me to do one little thing, I could do it, right? But generally speaking, I just did nothing but surf the internet all day and all night. So during that time, I was, as I say, writing screenplays on my lunch hour. I was studying everything under the sun to do with UFOs and ETs and you name it. And I came across Mark Richards' wife, Joanne Richards, and she was out on the circuit at that time talking about him and the whistleblowing he was doing, saying that he worked in the secret space program. And people were just mean to her across the board. They were, really mean to him. They were panning it all over the place. And I got this instant hit that it was true, that he was real, and that she wasn't lying. And that I said to myself at this time, I had no idea how I was going to do it. I'm going to interview that man someday. I hadn't even started Camelot back in the day. So
Wow.
that was like what happened. And one of the other things that I came across on a psychic level was Ashiana Dean's website. And out of the blue, I just landed on the page and I knew instantly that it was real, that it was right. And I started exploring it to see if my, intuition was correct. And sure enough, it had amazing information. Eventually I read her books. I'm one of the only people that has ever interviewed her.
Yeah.
James of the Wingmakers is the same thing. I'm the only person practically in the world that's ever interviewed him. And I got I thought I got the lifetime of the rights to shop the project, but I found out recently that I guess I only got it for a year. I don't know if everything just got mixed up, but anyway, so wingmakers.com, and that made a huge impression. I talked to James on the phone and got to know their whole layout and everything they were doing, and found out that Spielberg had rejected that movie, the possibility of making that project into a movie, which is absolutely fascinating story. And I realized that he was part of the cover-up. The reason they wouldn't make the Wingmakers movie is not because it wasn't like the most dynamite project you can imagine, sci-fi, but because they don't want the truth out. So
Fascinating.
strange to say that 20 years later, since the day, because eventually I left Hollywood, right, to do my path in this mission. And so
Mhm.
20 years went by. I've interviewed all these whistleblowers, right? And it turns out that I came full circle because then I went back to James. I saw he was still out there, still writing books. He had left, what's called the ACIO. And I tried to persuade him to let me get the rights again to shop the movie. But he had hired a Korean guy, and he and I did not get along. So for a while, I worked on this movie that they're doing, which is called Copernicus, which is about an AI. And James is very brilliant. He's very talented. He's written many books. But he still stays on the fringe somehow. But anyway, I didn't get
Mhm.
along with the producer he hired, so that didn't work out. But that was just like 6 months ago or 9 months
Oh,
ago when I got to
wow.
get on board with that. So I don't know what exactly is happening, but okay, so the bottom line, I don't know how much time, I'm going to try to make this really, really short. So the bottom line is Wingmakers is about a race of androids that spots our planet and drives by our solar system and decides to come and invade. And we are invaded by a race of androids. That's the story of Wingmakers. And the Wingmakers are our progenitors who are guarding Earth. And there's a guy named 15 who runs what's called the ACIO and the Labyrinth Project, which is all about protecting the Earth from this invasion of androids. And so when I went back to James after 20 years, 3-Eye Atlas suddenly was in the sky. So I wrote to
Mhm.
him and I asked him, is this that craft, right? Because could be. But he said, no, but it's a precursor. It's the first step, something like that.
Fascinating.
So, and since then, he's kind of gone quiet. So I'm on the trail to expose this story, to get people to realize, because over the years, the 20 years I've been in, I started with Wingmakers, and over the years, I would always keep that in my mind that I was going to get back to make that movie. And
Mhm.
so what happened is that I have had whistleblowers who have come to me that have said, yes, that's true. Yes, it's going to happen. Yes, it's predicted. So now, come full circle, I am out there, right, making videos and articles and talking to people about this because I believe, in a sense, it's almost a metaphor because we're invaded by AI. We have alien AI here that most people don't know about, and we do have androids and synths. And I believe that this is actually in the offing. And one of our top witnesses, called Pete Peterson, said in an interview that yes, we have androids, we have armies of androids hidden underground, and so do the Chinese, in preparation for this eventuality. And
Mhm.
on top of that, I've interviewed military people who tell me they're being trained to fight aliens. And if you know anything about the Halo series and Ready Player One and all these children now are being taught to fight aliens.
Wow, what a time we're living in, Carrie. This is so wild.
Yeah.
So I have to just ask you a question I know people want me to ask because I just would love your personal thoughts. So there's all the idea of the people who are involved in Hollywood goes from everybody's bad, everybody is these demonic people to some of them are actually playing a role and they're good guys playing a role to get this bad information out. So you mentioned Steven Spielberg. He has been one of those guys who have run the gamut of what people have thought. What are your thoughts about him?
Well, I have to be careful, okay?
Okay.
About the murder of that comedian. And that was a satanic murder. And Hollywood is full of Satanism, there's no doubt. But it's since I was there, going up the ranks, I wasn't aware of it. Okay. It didn't come to my door really. We knew dark things were going on. Certainly when we knew that producers were trying, the Me Too movement
Right.
and how they were seducing actresses. That was always going on. So that was
Yeah.
never, but they were not children. I mean, but
Right.
then the whole pedophile thing, and I've reported on that extensively on my site, and the what I call the adrenochrome highway. And I believe that a lot of Hollywood celebrities were addicted to adrenochrome before they knew what it really was. But once you're addicted, if you stop taking it, then you aged horribly. So this is the problem. It's like they get hooked. Um, so what can I tell you? Spielberg, he has always been, or he was. Now this may have changed since then, but back when I was, trying to make it in Hollywood, he was the top of the pyramid. Okay, and he had access to every project that would come across the desk in Hollywood. Any project, he would decide if he wanted it, or the person or the production company could have it. Okay, so that's
Mhm.
how it worked behind the scenes in Hollywood. He was like the big cheese, whatever, and that's gone on for many years. I do believe that he might be part of this old boy network that is infiltrated by pedophiles and whatever. Okay. I don't know about him personally. Okay. So
Mhm.
I actually met in passing on a job, George Lucas at one time. And I met some other, I've met famous, some very
Mhm.
famous people, but I never met Spielberg. Our paths never crossed, even though I admired him, as a young woman. Um,
Right. Yeah.
and I loved Francis Ford Coppola, and I don't think I've ever met him. But the thing is that I tend to see people as probably good when I first meet them, regardless. But I
Right.
have a psychic sense. So because I haven't met him in person, I can't tell you for sure what his deal is. I can tell you
Mhm.
certain people that I have always known that other people didn't. Um, I wonder if I can say Tom Hanks. Okay. He's notorious. Whether he's even alive, we don't know. That's one person. I knew from day one there's something wrong with that guy. Okay. And
Really?
I hated that. What is that famous movie he was in with the guy that had learning disability?
Forrest Gump.
Rain Man or Forrest Gump. Yeah.
Forrest Gump.
So yeah, I hated that movie. I mean, so I tap in. I do have this amazing sense that has proven right over and over and over again. So somehow I just knew. There's other. I had a situation in New York City when I was there. I was working in looking for jobs in the movie business, but I got a job. Actually, I was pretty desperate, and I got a job in a music company. And the guy who was
Mhm.
running the music company was editing also films or something like that. So I had only started there, and I was only there for like a week, and I was working kind of late at night to help in the editing room, and he was in there. And all of a sudden, I realized that there was something wrong with him, that he was dangerous, and that he was, at that time, pedo wasn't a common word. It wasn't, I just
No.
knew that he was dangerous and creepy. And I quit on the spot and I walked out. And he thought I was out of my mind, but he knew that I knew something about him. And
Wow.
it was pretty
Yeah.
actually scary because it came out of the blue. Like he had no idea I was going to say, I had just gotten the job. We're trying to make nice and be friendly and everything like you do at the beginning of a job. And all of a sudden just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just quit and I made up an excuse. And I think he just knew that I knew somehow.
Yeah. Well, the path you've had in your life, you had to have a really strong intuition. I mean, there's no way you could have survived otherwise.
Right.
And so I have one last question for you. And first of all, Carrie, this has been a fascinating interview. So thank you
Thanks.
so much. Um,
Thanks.
what I have found talking to different truth tellers, those that are newer in this, and not as seasoned of a pioneer of you, but all along the way, everybody has experienced an increase of their spirituality in this spiritual war with which we're living. Now, you reflected that you've always been spiritual, obviously, but have you seen, in the Q military drops actually have biblical quotes in them and everything as well, and people really do believe that this is a spiritual war along with the military war and all that.
Mhm.
And people have just grown, their spirituality has grown. Do you see that in yourself? Do you see that in other people around you? What are your thoughts about that?
Uh, well, it's kind of for a last question, it's kind of a deep question, right? So the bottom line is that, of course, when going through everything I did, I knew actually I also know my past lives to some degree. I've had so many sort of miraculous, psychic, intuitive happenings, and I that just increases your spirituality, okay? Because you realize that we're not alone. There are other beings everywhere. It's just opened my mind in every way. And so
Mhm.
I tend to be much more open minded than almost anyone I will ever meet on some certain levels. Okay.
Mhm.
Not when it comes to evil. And so I think there's, okay, one thing that getting exposed again to the right wing MAGA types. Okay. Because I was very used to the Democrat, love everybody, whatever that is, and a bunch of fakery going on. I have come to have a very, what do you want to call it? Love hate relationship with the MAGA people because, and I've had huge arguments with 107, for example. He's a super religious, or at least his act, I believe it's an act, but I pray it's an act because he's acts in my world psychotically religious and
Mhm.
so on. So I come out, I'm very straightforward. I just tell them what bullshit they're saying, what absolute lies they're saying, that Jesus would not like this, that the reptilians run this Catholic Church. I mean, like I'm blatant, okay? And so I have not changed in that regard. And when I meet these people, I will challenge them on occasion. Not every day and not all the time, but there are plenty of interviews out there where I say point blank, stuff like, because I guess because I've crossed so many thresholds if in the world of sort of the psychic and the spiritual, that I feel that I know. And now I know people will hate maybe hearing this, and you're not supposed to say that or any of this stuff. But I've tested myself time and time again. And for whatever it's worth, I tend to be more or less right most of the time. Now, I don't know everything, and I've had things that have surprised me. I mean, when Bill Ryan turns against me, that came as a surprise to me. Okay. So I probably should not have ever, gotten involved with him. But when I know that it was a plus, and it gets into Camelot, and it's all in my book, and you can read about it. But the thing is that, I just know things, and I can't help it that I know them. I'm proven right over and over again. Doesn't mean I'm always right. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm not the greatest financial person. I'm really kind of bad in that area. But I don't know. Also had this amazing, I don't know, luck, and I have unseen presences that are protecting me. And I'm also told, and this happens from time to time, I'm told that there are people in the secret space community. There may even be some Illuminati that know deeply what I'm talking about. Okay. And they might not be on the side of good. They could easily be evil. But for some reason, because I talk about what they talk about, and I make no bones about it, I'll just say exactly what it is and what they believe and out them. I think they get a kick out of it. So sometimes
Mhm.
I get that kind of thing. I've had people
Mhm.
approach me very quietly at conferences and basically say, keep doing what you're doing. Thank God you're out there, and very sophisticated people
Mhm.
I've had approach me and say, certain things, and I know that they are. I even have, I've met aliens in various ways, okay, in real life and just in passing and things. Um, so what can I tell you? I'm not trying to say like I'm some chosen one. I believe that a lot of us that are in touch with aliens and various races are protected by those races, okay? Because we're one of them. And so we have
Mhm.
this incredible genetic pool, and there are plenty of people, and we're all, I call us alien human hybrids. We're all hybrids, every single one of
Mhm.
us, as far as I'm concerned. Um,
Mhm.
I don't fall for a lot of the religious bullshit. I don't like the Bible. I think it has some good stuff in it. I think it's full of lies as well. I don't think they understood Jesus whatsoever. And, I mean, he was a rebel like me, and he said,
Mhm.
one of his famous quotes is, I come to bring a sword, not peace. I think that's cutting through the bullshit. That's, the difference between good and evil. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. So, people hate, like I say, oh, I'm not a Christian in the conventional sense, but I do believe in avatars like Jesus and
Mhm.
Buddha, not Mohammed. I don't consider him an
Mhm.
avatar to make
Mhm.
a lot of people angry. But, I'm just, just being straightforward here.
Sure. So, final thing, this year is 2026. Do you see what are your thoughts about 2026 here?
Well, we're in it. I mean, we're already deep in, and it's crazy. I mean, the whole thing with
It
silver.
is.
I actually think there's a spiritual dimension to what's going on with gold and silver. Gold and silver have they're not just metals that help you in space travel, for example.
Mhm.
Gold
Mhm.
allows you to go interdimensional, for example. And silver is very connected to higher knowledge and the Pleiadians, for one thing. So the idea that metals are, they're called rare earth minerals and all of this, I think there's a plot to create a scarcity that doesn't exist. I think we have a plenty of both those metals as well as many others here on Earth, but we also are mining out in space already. So the market that they say they have and all this jerking up and jerking down, the games that are being played, I
Yeah.
think there is a spiritual aspect to it. And I think it's kind of like teaching people to stop clinging so desperately to, sort of these material realities, that to understand what's happening, it's being manipulated. And, much to my dismay, the white hats, who I have admired very much because they want to rescue children and the good side of them. They want to do what Kennedy wanted to do, which are wonderful and admirable. But I also am disappointed with some of the choices they've made, and I feel that they need to live up to a higher standard. Um, and I mean, it's a complex world, and they're military
It
people, and
is.
it's a war,
Yeah.
and being judgmental of a soldier when they're at war, it's like an odd thing to do. So
Yeah.
I write it in articles of my point of view. So I think that's the
Mhm.
best place for people to go for more information.
Absolutely, and so I've putting, through the whole interview, your website and everything so that they can check everything out and find your videos, your book, all your articles, everything, your past just everything, and
Thank
there's
you.
a wealth of information there from years and years of you just having your nose to the grindstone and just having these amazing interviews, and so thank you, Carrie, for just spending time. This has just been such a treat, because you really
Thank
have
you.
been just a you have been a pioneer, but you've been just so strong and fearless and and you're going to be studied for a long time. And people are going to look back at your interviews and reflect back for many years to come. So I can't
Thank
thank
you.
you enough. I really do appreciate you spending time with us, for me and the audience.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the good questions. And, I don't usually get into my background and all that. Every once in a great while, someone asks me those kind of questions. So I guess it's
Yeah.
kind of a breath of fresh air, maybe, for
Yeah.
people.
It is. People really want to know, and they're gonna wanna know way in the future. So thanks very, very much, and have a great night, and I appreciate you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
Okay,
Bye
take
bye.
care.